Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Mad Science Lab on the Fantasy Football Universe. I am Aaron St. Dennis. Follow me everywhere at FF Mad Scientist. Joined today by Andrew Hall at Andrew Hall FF. He is here to talk Cincinnati Bengals 2024. How's it going, Andrew?
Oh, it's going well, Aaron. I love doing these, any of these shows where I get to talk about my home team, my Bengals. You know, I'm repping them every day on the shows that I do. So always a pleasure to talk Bengals with you, man. I'm looking forward to it.
This is the last year I did this series, but I didn't really know anyone. So I just kind of took anyone I could find. This year I knew a few more people. So I got analysts who are actually fans of that team. Let me tell you, I might have been better off with people who didn't like that team because every team in the NFL is going to win 12 or 13 games this year.
No, we're all going to win the Super Bowl. That's how it goes, right? Everybody wins.
It is July right now, and everybody is still very high on the outlook for their team, apparently. Training camp and spring training, the preseason have not set in yet, and nobody thinks their team sucks, except for two. We had my buddy Jeremy thought the Patriots suck, and there was one other team that they admitted sucked. But everybody's good, so I'm sure you'll have the Bengals at 13 or 14 wins.
Darn right. That's how we do it in July. It's all hopium.
Well, 14 wins may have them projected for fifth in the AFC in this little series. So before we get into the Bengals, you want to take a second here? Tell everyone where they can find you.
Sure thing. Yeah, you can find me on X at Andrew Hall FF. I am writing for Fantasy Pros. You can find my articles on there. And then I do a Dynasty Junkies podcast. We rotate most of the time through the off season, and there's four hosts that kind of take our turns, and real life gets in the way sometimes. But that's where I get to talk a lot about Dynasty and do trade stuff and kind of all of that. And then also this year, leading up to the season, I'm doing a Rate My League with Matt Chester, FF Mad Jester, which is kind of fun. If anybody out there is looking for an individualized podcast for your league, we'll take it, look at all the different stats, all the metrics and everything like that, put it through the calculations, and then say, top to bottom, here's the best, and then here's the worst. And sometimes those can get really contentious. Sometimes those can be, it's an opinion, but it's still based on some numbers. But that's a lot of fun, and that's something else we're doing this offseason.
I think I've used those before. He publishes them every year, I believe, for Scott Fishbowl divisions, doesn't he?
That's exactly right. That's actually what got me started with them, because I love that idea. I love the layout. I love the way it was all kind of put together in a really easy to digest format. And then I think it was last offseason, I was talking with him about something else, and he was like, well, would you want to do personalized podcasts? I'm like, heck yeah, I love talking fantasy. So that's kind of where Matt and I are the two that are doing that this year. So yeah, just always around, just always trying to do stuff and have fun in Dynasty. That's pretty much my thought.
That sounds awesome. I've never spoken to him personally, but I'm familiar, like I said, from Scott Fishbowl. On a side note, I don't mean to sound harsh here. I think you're about the same age as me, which means you're not Gen Z. You can't call it X. You got to have to call it Twitter till the day you die, like the rest of us old people.
You know what? You're right. I apologize for calling it X. That was a mistake. It is Twitter. It should always be Twitter. And I really don't even, I'm so used to people like calling me out for not calling it X that I went the other direction, and that was wrong anyway. So
well, you Twitter. Can't win. That's what you learned. It's social.
Yep.
Now you can't win anything, but
that's right.
I'm not trying to be hip here. It will be Twitter till the day I die. I remember MySpace. I am not hip enough to call it X.
Amen to that. MySpace was lit though. I like that. For the kids, the Gen Z kids.
The 2 years it lasted back with Laserdisc.
Hey, Tom was our friend. That's all I know.
It was. I remember that corny. Anyways, we've gone completely off the rails here. Let's get us into some Cincinnati Bengals talk. QB room is an unexciting one, although Joe Burrow is a guy. This entire team I have a ton of shares of. Everyone is at a huge discount with the exception of Jamar Chase, including Joe Burrow, who I've gotten as my QB2 in Superflex in the third and fourth round. But so the QBs, Burrow finished as QB25 last year with some injuries, going as QB7 this year. I call bullshit on that because every league I've seen, he goes more like QB12. Backups are Jake Browning and Logan Woodside. What are your thoughts here on the QBs? I guess more specifically, the only one that matters in Joe Burrow.
Yeah, I mean, Burrow's definitely a top 10 quarterback. I'm with you. I think I have him in top 5 easy. I think depending on the format, if it's a heavy rushing format, like if quarterbacks get a lot of points for rushing or they get bonuses for rushing or anything like that, or if it's a 4-point per passing touchdown, that kind of stuff, I could see Burrow being a little less. I do think he still runs the ball, but he doesn't need to. And I think that's the difference between him and guys like, Jalen Hurts, Lamar Jackson, even Josh Allen to an extent. Like all those guys are going to be, running the ball a lot, and everybody expects that. I don't think everybody expects Burrow to do that, especially coming off a wrist injury. There's some talk that, maybe he won't be 100% to start the season. I believe he will be. I'm pretty sure that'll all be healed up and ready to go. He's already taken snaps and off-season stuff, so I'm not really worried about him at all. So yeah, I'm full in on Joe Burrow. I'm with you. I'm getting a lot of shares, or even acquiring him for cheaper than I expected in Dynasty League. So yeah, he's definitely somebody I want on my roster. If I can get him at the second, third round turn, that sounds great to me.
Yeah, he's kind of in the bridge group for me. It's the top 5 quarterbacks. Then I have him in the bridge tier there with Anthony Richardson. Depending on format, like Scott Fishbowl, Richardson goes above. Heavy passing, it's Burrow. But those are the two for where I'm in on them. And I see them going like after Dak and Kyler. And like Dak is great, but I have Burrow and Richardson in that group, and it's not particularly close for me.
Yep.
So anytime I have a lot of times where I like the late group of Cousins, Rodgers, Stafford, Geno, boring quarterbacks like that, where I can punt QB2 and I can draft them in the 7th round. But there's a couple of scenarios where, I get there and Richardson never falls. So that's never a possibility. But Burrow, I'll find Burrow, or even like I said, the Dak Murray, that group there, they'll fall to the 2-3 turn into the 3rd round. That's one of the spots where I'm going, screw it. I'm just going to shore up quarterback right now. And I'm going to stack, I was saying this, I've got, even with Tua, I've got some Josh Allen, Tua, I've got Josh Allen, Joe Burrow. Like, if you would ask me 3 years ago, if I could start with a Josh Allen, Joe Burrow team in Superflex, I would tell you, how did I go about acquiring 2 top 5 picks?
Yeah.
No, not anymore. Now I can get one of them in the 3rd round. So
yeah,
sure. We did this a few years ago with Mahomes. I remember mid-season, everyone was down on Mahomes 7 games in, and I remember seeing Mahomes, and I can't for the life of me remember what quarterback it was. Might have been a Kyler or something like that, and someone traded Mahomes straight up for Kyler, and I'm going, what the hell are you doing? He's obviously going to bounce back. He's a stud, and like 6 weeks later, it's like, oh, shit, you screwed up.
You were right.
You're an idiot. I don't know. But so we're doing this now. We're drafting Joe Burrow, and it's like, oh, he had a bad season with injuries, and T. Higgins wants out. Well, T. Higgins is still there. What's his name? Joe Mixon was gone. Oh, well, that didn't, Joe Mixon was getting old. I don't understand how he doesn't beat this ADP. So I have an insane amount of exposure to Joe Burrow at his current cost, because there's no way he should be getting, like, I originally started the offseason here, even in some of the Scott Fishbowl mocks, I was taking him at the end of the 1st, beginning of the 2nd, and I just said, screw it, I'm going to stop drafting him in these mocks because I want to see how late he'll go if I'm not the guy pulling the trigger. And I was like, oh, great, I could just get him in the 3rd round. So that it's one of the great ones where it kind of helped me refine my process, where it's like, stop drafting the guy I want just to see how, gauge how late I can pull the trigger on him and still get him.
Yep.
And now I'm saving myself a second round pick or late 1st round pick, and I'm just drafting Joe Burrow in the 2-3 turns. So
Oh, I love it. No, if I can get Joe Burrow in the 3rd round of Scott Fishbowl, I'd be happier than a pig in slop. That sounds awesome. I'm in the Cincinnati live draft, so that ain't going to happen in a hometown crew.
No.
But I also, if we're talking about other sleepers too, like things like Justin Herbert and Trevor Lawrence are going really late too. So you could do something where you take like a receiver or a running back in the 1st, maybe reach a little on Burrow in the beginning of the 2nd, and then still be fine to take other positions and get Herbert and Lawrence and even Tua maybe in the 6, 7, 8 kind of area. And I think that's what makes this year so much fun for Superflex, is that these quarterbacks are still terrific. You don't have to reach, and you don't have to go quarterback at the top. There's plenty of other talent, and you can kind of wait on that QB2 and get a ton of other value elsewhere. So yeah, I think Burrow's prime in that spot. And I think he's going to be a surprise at ADP. I think he's going to outperform QB7 for sure.
Yeah, sorry, that's an interesting one with Scott Fishbowl, because I'm the 5 in my draft, and the way I'm planning it is there are 4 quarterbacks I want based on this setting, and then Christian McCaffrey. So based on who I get, if I get one of my 4 quarterbacks, I'm going to go running back probably in the 2nd round, and then see who falls in the 3rd or 4th round at quarterback. If I somehow get the miracle of Christian McCaffrey falling to me at 5, which has happened in a couple of mocks, it's not the craziest thing. If that happens, then I'll be looking at the Joe Burrow, Trevor Lawrence, that group there. Who's the other one you said? Oh, Justin Herbert.
Yep.
At the at the end of towards the end of the 2nd, early 3rd. So I guess, like I said, that's a great group, and I love that they're falling. And it's a wonderful luxury to have.
That's right.
Move on here to the running back room. It's a new look room here. We've got Zach Moss coming over from Indy, RB26 last year, RB26 this year. Chase Brown looked pretty good there. I only know how great he looked because I had a lot of Joe Mixon exposure, and I swear I had more than one occurrence where a long touchdown was scored and I began celebrating the Joe Mixon touchdown, only to realize it was Chase Brown.
Yep, I remember that game.
Yep. And then we have Travion Williams and Chris Evans to round it out. What are your thoughts here on the running back room?
Yeah, so I think Zach Moss is a terrific addition to this team. I think he fits right in with the we don't care about who our RB1 is kind of mentality that the Bengals seem to have. I like the fact that it's him and Chase kind of maybe splitting carries and kind of a 1A, 1B sort of relationship. I think, too, that Chase Brown is the one that I want more than Zach Moss just because of the lower cost, right? I mean, if you're looking at ADP, was that RB 38? Is that what that's like? That's not overall ADP. That's
no, it's RB 38.
Yeah, so I'd much rather have RB 38, like the 38th running back, because I think there's a very solid chance that Chase Brown, at least in the end of the season, if nothing else, takes over at some point during this year. And I think Zach Moss has been okay, but hasn't been worthy of that RB1 overall potential. And I think Chase Brown, if he's given that job, whether by injury or by opportunity, if he takes it, I think he runs with it, pun intended. And I think he becomes a very solid option down the stretch. So I'm very happy to take Chase Brown at that ADP. I'm not against taking Moss either. I prefer the cheaper guy if they're going to be about the same.
We have another two Cincy players here that I have an insane amount of exposure to. Zach Moss, I had a ton of early exposure. Him and Jerome Ford, I was getting late everywhere.
Yeah.
Zach Moss and Jerome Ford, the ADP is starting to rise, so I'm not getting them. I'm not getting them as much now as I was a month or two ago. Chase Brown, I don't know if this is me being high on Chase Brown or low on Tyjae Spears. I see him as cheap Tyjae Spears. It's essentially the same situation. Yeah. I think Chase Brown's probably just as every bit as good. The difference is he goes as RB 38 and Tyjae Spears is going, 24, 25? So a handful of rounds earlier. So
again, at the same point, like I like Tyjae Spears, don't get me wrong, but that Pollard thing is going to make a wrinkle there. And I think Chase Brown's path to relevancy is easier than Spears right now. So yeah, I mean, I don't hate Zach Moss. I mean, don't hear what I'm not saying. I just feel like the price is lower. That means the risk is lower, but the reward can be the same. That's pretty much where I'm at, especially with running backs this year. There's a lot of good depth at running back position. There's a lot of good teams that have 2 or 3 even running backs that could become fantasy relevant. So I'm fine taking later flyers on running back and kind of stocking up at receiver early and then just diving deep into that running back pool after the 7th and 8th round.
Yeah, like I said early, I had a lot more Zach Moss, but the ADP's starting to really get up there. And as Zach Moss's ADP is getting steamed up, Chase Brown is getting pushed down a little. So I've shifted more and I have a lot more Chase Brown, especially in Dynasty. I like RB 38 off the board. That's free money. So even if he's a bust, which I don't expect him to be, I'll take it all day.
Yeah, but at that price, even if he is a bust, you know what I mean? It's all right. Yeah, I didn't invest a lot. I can throw that away and drop. Well, that's the best thing, too, in my opinion, about doing late running backs. You usually know by week 1 or 2, or I should say week 2 or 3, I guess, if they're going to be worth stashing on your bench or not. You know, if Chase Brown comes out and gets 0 touches in week 1, well, then you can drop him for the nice, new waiver wire everybody's talking about kind of player because you didn't really invest a lot on him probably at RB 38. And there's always going to be injuries through the offseason and the preseason and everything. There's always going to be, guys that get hyped up and gassed up and all that as we get closer to the season. So I'm fine taking a bunch of flyers on running back. And then if they don't pan out, it's an easy cut, which sometimes I think gets lost in the shuffle is like having somebody to cut can sometimes be a lot more meaningful than, making sure it's a stud receiver or stud running back. I like to know for sure who I can get rid of too.
Absolutely. We will get into the wide receiver room here. Jamar Chase finished as wide receiver 11, going as wide receiver 4, followed by T. Higgins, who was wide receiver 43, going as 29. The rookie Jermaine Burton, Andre Yoshivas, Trent Irwin, Charlie Jones, Kwame Lassiter, and Shedrick Jackson. Thoughts here?
I think the biggest thought is Chase is clearly a stud. I think he's in that top tier with CeeDee Lamb and Justin Jefferson and even maybe Tyreek Hill for redraft leagues. I think that some of those guys are just terrific and are going to be no doubt performers. And that's who you want if you're going to take a receiver early. I think Higgins has got a lot of question marks, but I think he's going to have a stellar season primarily because of the narrative around what's gone on with him. He did sign his franchise tag. I think he's playing for a bigger contract, whether it's with the Bengals or somewhere else. And I'd be shocked if we don't see him try to break out. I know he's missed some games due to injury the last couple of years, and you can't really predict or prevent that too much. I mean, it's the nature of this game we play. But I'd be shocked if we see Higgins, opting out of playing this year. I think if anything, he's going to defer. Yes, let me get in there. Let me get some more stats. Let me show my worth on the field. So the teams like, I don't know, Los Angeles Chargers or the Oakland Raiders, the Las Vegas Raiders, or like the Cleveland Browns, even like some of those guys that need a wide receiver 2 or even a up and coming wide receiver 1 will be willing to pay him a big check. But he's going to have to prove it on the field for me. And then the other thing that comes to mind here is Jermaine Burton as wide receiver 78. I get it. Like that's how rookies go, but I don't know if I want to even risk it with Burton. I'd much rather get him off waivers once we know how this thing shakes out. But with Chase and Higgins in there, and we just talked about Moss and Chase, behind him, Chase Brown, I should say, at running back, like those guys are going to get a little bit of attention too. I just don't know if we're going to see a rookie really hop in here if he doesn't have top 2 potential on the team. So I'm a little hesitant on Burton. I think Yoshivas and Irwin are both guys that are good flyer flex options, but probably not drafting either. I know I've got a lot of shares in Dynasty of Charlie Jones and things like that, just in case something happens. But when it comes to redraft, I mean, I think the ranking makes sense, but I'm probably lower on Burton than the others.
I have an insane amount of T. Higgins and very little Jamar Chase. I'm not out on Chase. I just very rarely find that I have the pick that's required to get him. I don't have the early enough pick to get him in 1 QB. In 2 QB, I just find he's always gone, or I end up with CD Lamb. T. Higgins is one of those guys where I find he slips a lot into the group of Jalen Waddle, and I just end up with, it's like, all the top 10 or whatever are gone, and okay, I'll just take, I've stacked a lot of Jalen Waddle, T. Higgins, and I'm like, oh, I can deal with these as my 1 and 2. I don't hate it. I know everyone's down on them, so I'll just take the discount, hope they both bounce back.
Yep, no, I agree.
Next up, the tight end room here, we have Mike Gesicki, tight end 38 last year, 28 this year, followed by Tanner Hudson, Eric All, the rookie out of Iowa, Tanner McLaughlin, the rookie out of Arizona, and Drew Sample. Any thoughts here? Is anyone fantasy relevant?
Well, so I think one of them is going to be, I wouldn't be upset if it's Gesicki, but I'm not exactly sure I want to be the one taking that risk at draft day. I'd much rather wait a little bit and see what happens. Again, like I've been saying with this whole team, it feels like there's now a much more distinct funnel to the Chase and Higgins show. In the past years, there was always Tyler Boyd that was going to get some catches, and we've had, Irv Smith and other players that have been on the Bengals that, for fantasy-wise anyway, just never really panned out. So I'm not exactly looking at this like this is the year that we see a tight end become relevant. I feel like it's more likely that Mike Gesicki at tight end ADP or tight end 28 in ADP feels about right to me. Like that's probably where he belongs. I wouldn't be shocked, though, at all if he finishes as tight end 20. And then you get people going, oh my God, look at the value. Yeah, he's tight end 20. I don't care. Like, unless he's one of the top 5 or 10 tight ends, I'm probably not interested. And I don't mind streaming him. But again, you're going to have to get everything exactly right. And again, we've seen the Bengals rotate that tight end, and they've got 5 of them still this year that'll be rotating around. I mean, it's very possible you see Gesicki 4 catches for 42 yards, 2 first downs, but Drew Sample gets a touchdown on 1 catch for 12 yards. Like you never really know. You can't really funnel everything to the one tight end like you can on a lot of other teams. So I'm not entirely out on tight ends in Cincinnati, but I'm not really excited about him either, which I guess by default makes me out because I'm not getting any. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's kind of how I view this tight end room. Unless you have the potential to be a tight end 1, I don't really care. So unless
I want it to be good. Yeah, I want him to do well, but I don't have enough data to back that up.
Yeah, until they prove something, they're not really on my radar. Which brings us to the moment of truth. Who's a target and who's an avoid for you on this team?
So I think if I'm going with like a top tier target, it's Higgins, which we kind of talked about. I just think he's going to have a breakout year this year, and I think his ADP is a little lower than where his finish will be, where his final standings will be. So Higgins is definitely something I'm trying to target, or someone I'm trying to target in trades and dynasty. And if I can get him in, that 5th, 6th round kind of area, even like that's a terrific steal to me. I think they're, especially in Superflex when things get pushed down, I think he's going higher than that in most drafts. But again, it's because of the Bengals' high-powered offense. So I'm sorry, Tanner. Geez, T. Higgins is somebody that I'm looking at as my potential sleeper, I guess, if there is such a thing on this team.
Yeah, I think that was who I was going to take. Who you got as an avoid here?
Man, my avoid is probably in the same group. It would be Jermaine Burton. Like I mentioned before, like rookie receivers have such a low hit rate, especially late ones like that. So I much rather would take a flyer on Yoshevich as a free pick or the last pick than I would with Burton in the 10th round or something. Like I just feel like there's a lot of other players I just trust more than Burton. As much as I want him to be a thing, he's going to be the third, maybe fourth, maybe fifth top receiving asset on this team. And as a rookie, I feel like you need to hit the ground running. And I just don't know if he's going to have that kind of opportunity, at least in year one. Now, don't get me wrong. In Dynasty, he's got a ton of value because if Higgins does leave, and in theory, that's kind of the talk at this point, is that they won't be able to afford Higgins, Chase, and Burrow. And we just got Burrow's contract. Chase is going to get a monster one next year based on the Justin Jefferson stuff. So I wouldn't be shocked if T leaves, and then that elevates Burton to more relevant status. So he's somebody I'm targeting in theory in Dynasty for the cheap, but you're not going to be able to get him very cheap because everybody's gassing him up for redraft. So I feel like he's somebody at that price I'm just not interested in, not until I see a little bit more.
All right, let's close it out with the schedule here. I'll say the game. You tell me win or lose. Week 1, home to the Patriots.
Win.
All right. Week 2 at Kansas City.
I hate to say it, but I'm going to say loss. Arrowhead is just our bugaboo right now, and I think that game is going to mean a lot to them. So unfortunately, I'm going to say loss there.
Week 3, home to the Commanders.
Monday Night Football, that's a win, baby.
Week 4 at the Panthers.
That's a win.
Week 5, home to the Ravens.
Home, we win.
Home, you win. Okay. Week 6 at the Giants.
Again, ironically, I'm going to say loss because it's prime time in New York. It's going to be a great narrative game. And because we lead up into the Cleveland game the next week. And I just feel like that's just how our luck goes.
Week 7 at Cleveland.
Loss. Yeah, I hate to say it, but I just feel like that's what our season's going to be like, is 3 and 4 through the first 7 weeks there.
Week 8, home to the Eagles.
This is where it gets weird. I'm going to say win. I think we can beat the Eagles at home.
Week 9, home to the Raiders.
Win.
Week 9, home to the Raiders.
I said win. I'm sorry. Yeah, we win.
Oh, sorry. I didn't hear you on that one.
My
bad. Week 10 at Baltimore.
I got to say loss there. I think Baltimore's a tough one, and we split that series.
Week 11 at the Chargers.
I think we win that one.
Going into the bye, you have them 7-4, right on pace for your 12 or 13 wins like everyone else.
Right? Yeah.
Week 13, home to the Steelers.
I think we beat the Steelers at home.
14 at Dallas.
Hate to say it again, but I think we lose. These primetime games are going to be adding up to us, and I just think that after that Steelers win, they're going to pound us, and I think we lose to the Cowboys for some strange twist.
Week 15 at Tennessee.
If it's at Tennessee, so I'm going to say loss because, again, I just think that team is going to have, the Tyler Boyd and the coach, I forget his name, Callahan, I think it is. Like, they're just going to, it's going to be an emotional game, and it's at Tennessee, so I think we win or lose that one. Sorry.
16, home to the Browns.
Thursday Night Football, I'm giving us the victory on that one. It's getting cold. I don't think the Browns are going to be able to stay with us too long there, so that's ours.
Week 17, home to the Broncos.
I want to know if this one's at primetime or not. Obviously, we don't know that yet because I think the Broncos are kind of a dark horse team. I want to say loss, but I'm going to go with my heart and say win. So, yeah, give me a win.
And to close it out, Week 18 at Pittsburgh.
I hate to do it again, but I think they get us here. I think they play spoiler on our season. I think we end up finishing as the third or fourth in the AFC instead of the first. And I think Steelers love having that on us at the end of the season. So, unfortunately, that's kind of my guess.
You were far too rational in your projections. You only have them with 10 wins. That's probably good for 14th in the AFC.
Well, so here's where I'm going with this too. Like a lot of those games that I'm picking losses, like the Giants and Cowboys, for instance, I'm looking at it like what would make the most sense? Like, do I think my team can win them all? Of course, I'm a fan of the team, but realistically speaking, that's just not how it goes. And I think that it's just going to be more chaos, and the AFC is brutal. So even though we have a great schedule, I think as classic Bengals fans, anybody who's been a fan for longer than a year or two knows we don't always win the games we should. So it's almost easier to just plan on 10-7 and see how it goes, All
right. Well, thank you for joining me, Andrew. Before we get out of here, you want to take another second to tell everyone where they can find you and your work?
Sure thing. Yeah, you can find me on Twitter, just to be clear, on Twitter at AndrewHallFF. You can find all my writing at Fantasy Pros. You can find my Dynasty takes on Dynasty Junkies, which is currently every other Thursday heading up to the season. And then it'll be every Thursday live during Thursday Night Football, usually starting around halftime. So if the game starts to get terrible, just tune in live on Twitter or YouTube or whatever. We'll keep you occupied for a little longer if you got to stay up and watch. And then other than that, like I said, rate my league. If you got any questions about any of that, if you have more information you want about Scott Fishbowl, I'm doing the live Cincinnati draft, which is actually coming up here shortly. Very excited about Scott Fishbowl season. So just hit me up on Twitter. I'm glad to help.
Awesome. Well, thank you for joining me, and thank you for everyone tuning in. This has been the Mad Science Lab on the Fantasy Football Universe. Check back tomorrow for the Chiefs with Mike Lindbergh. Take care, everyone.